The detection array on Kepler Station screamed warnings that hadn't been heard for 7 millennia. Captain Vexihara's 4 eyes widened as the impossible readings flooded her command console. The massive vessel emerging from the void bore markings that every spacefaring species had learned to recognize and fear. Human script. Ancient, angular, defiant. "Impossible," whispered Navigation Officer Quillen, his crystalline fingers trembling over the controls. "The humans went silent 7,000 years ago. Their entire civilization just vanished." The ship was enormous. Easily 3 kilometers long, its hull scarred by what looked like eons of battle damage. Yet it moved with purpose, its ancient engines burning with a steady, ominous light. Most disturbing of all, it was heading straight for the Galactic Council's capital world of Nexus Prime. Commander Rethol of the Peacekeeping Fleet received the emergency transmission within minutes. His scaled hide rippled with unease as he studied the footage. The last time humanity had been seen, they'd been a young species, barely capable of interstellar travel. They'd participated in exactly 3 council sessions before disappearing entirely, leaving behind only empty colonies and unanswered questions. "Send the standard hail," Rethel ordered. "Universal frequencies. If there's anyone alive on that ship." Static filled the bridge, then cleared to reveal something that made every alien officer step back in instinctive fear. A human face appeared on the screen, pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of millennia. But it was the smile that chilled them most. It was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Greetings, Council," the human said, their voice carrying an odd, musical cadence that seemed almost hypnotic. "I am Navigator Kith Andra of the vessel Prometheus Unbound. We bring word from the long silence." The transmission cut, leaving the bridge in stunned quiet. Across the galaxy, ancient archives were hastily consulted. The few remaining records of humanity painted a picture of a species unlike any other, innovative to the point of recklessness, emotionally volatile, and possessed of an almost supernatural ability to adapt and survive. They'd been the first species to develop practical, faster-than-light travel without outside assistance, the first to establish colonies on hostile worlds that other species deemed uninhabitable. They'd also been the first to ask uncomfortable questions about the Council's true nature. Admiral Torvin Class of the Council Defense Force studied the approaching vessel through his ship's viewports. His species, the Velthari, had been among the most vocal in their relief when humanity vanished. Humans asked too many questions, pushed too many boundaries, challenged too many established norms. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving another transmission. This one is different." The human who appeared on screen this time was older, wearing what looked like ceremonial robes covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "People of the galaxy," they began, "we have returned to fulfill a promise made long ago. A promise to show you what lies beyond the veil of your carefully constructed reality." The transmission showed images that defied comprehension, vast structures floating in impossible geometries, beings of pure energy dancing around dying stars, entire worlds that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. 7,000 years ago, we discovered the truth about this galaxy, the human continued. We learned what the Council has been hiding from all of you. We chose exile over complicity, but now the time for hiding is over. The Prometheus Unbound continued its inexorable approach toward Nexus Prime, and with each passing hour, more questions arose. How had humanity survived in the void for 7 millennia? What had they discovered that forced them into exile? And most importantly, what did they plan to do now that they had returned? Deep within the Council chambers on Nexus Prime, emergency. Session 7041 convened in unprecedented secrecy. The marble halls that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations now echoed with worried whispers in a dozen languages. High Counselor Arnthek, eldest of the Zendari race, called for order with trembling appendages. "The humans return at the worst possible moment," muttered Counselor Fix-Era, her insectoid features twitching with barely contained panic. "The harvest cycle isn't supposed to begin for another 3 centuries. Navigator Kithandra's second. Transmission had reached every inhabited system simultaneously, a feat that should have been technologically impossible. The message was simple but terrifying. "We know about the Watchers. We know about the culling. The galaxy will know the truth." On the bridge of the Prometheus Unbound, Kithandra stood before a holographic display showing the approaching Council fleet. Her crew moved with the fluid efficiency of people who had drilled the same procedures for millennia. Each human bore the same unsettling smile, the same 2 bright eyes that seemed to see beyond the physical realm. "Captain Velquin," she addressed, the figure seated in the command chair, a human so pale they seemed almost translucent, with silver hair that moved as if underwater. "The Council has deployed their full defensive fleet, 47 vessels, including 3 Titan-class dreadnoughts." Velquin's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "They still don't understand. Show them the archives, Navigator. The A." Transmission that followed reached every communications array in known space. Images flooded the galactic networks, ancient star charts, archaeological evidence, testimonies from long-dead civilizations. The truth was laid bare. Every 12,000 years, advanced civilizations in the galaxy simply vanished. The Council had painted these disappearances as natural evolutionary transcendence. The reality was far more sinister. "Behold the Watchers," Kithandra's voice accompanied footage of massive, geometric entities floating in the void between galaxies. "The true masters of this sector of space. They permit civilizations to develop only so far before harvesting them, consuming their accumulated knowledge and energy to fuel their own incomprehensible purposes." Commander Zefika of the Altarian Defense Corps watched the broadcast from his flagship, his blood running cold as the implications became clear. "The Council, they've been collaborating with these things?" The answer came in the form of intercepted Council communications, broadcast openly by the Prometheus Unbound. High Counselor Arnthek's voice was unmistakable. "The humans must be stopped before they reveal the compact. 7,000 years of peace, 7,000 years of controlled development. They would destroy it all." Across the galaxy, species that had never questioned their place in the cosmic order began to see the careful limitations that had been placed upon them. Technology that advanced too quickly was mysteriously lost. Scientists who approached. Certain discoveries met with convenient accidents. Entire research programs were quietly defunded or redirected. The Watchers had been using the Galactic Council as shepherds, keeping the flock docile until the time came for slaughter. "How did humanity escape?" Admiral Torvinclass demanded during an emergency military briefing. "How did they survive 7 millennia in the void?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Meshavara, the galaxy's foremost xenoarchaeologist, had been studying the human transmissions with growing fascination. "Look at their technology," she said, projecting holographic displays of the Prometheus Unbound's hull. "Those aren't battle scars, they're modifications. The humans didn't just escape into space, they escaped into something else entirely." The ship's hull was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when observed directly. Energy readings showed power sources that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Most disturbing of all, the vessel's mass readings were inconsistent. Sometimes showing as 3 kilometers of solid matter, other times barely registering at all. "They've been to the spaces between dimensions," Dr. Meshavara concluded. "They've learned to exist partially outside our reality. That's how they've remained hidden. That's how they survived." As the Prometheus Unbound drew closer to Nexus Prime, more human vessels began appearing throughout the galaxy, not emerging from hyperspace, simply materializing as if they had always been there, waiting. Each ship carried the same pale, smiling crew, each broadcasting the same message of revelation and reckoning. The Council's carefully maintained order was crumbling, and the Watchers' attention was turning toward the disturbance. In the dark spaces between stars, ancient intelligences that had slumbered for centuries began to stir, their geometric forms shifting through dimensions that had no names. Humanity had returned, but they had not returned alone. In the deepest archives of Nexus Prime, sealed records spoke of humanity's final days before the Great Silence. Librarian Quex Thera, one of the few beings granted access to these forbidden texts, worked frantically to understand what the galaxy faced. The truth was more complex than anyone had imagined. Humanity hadn't simply discovered the Watcher's existence, they had made contact. The recordings were fragmentary, damaged by time and deliberate censorship, but the story they told was chilling. 7,000 years ago, human scientists had been studying quantum entanglement on a galactic scale when they detected something vast and alien observing them in return. The first contact had been peaceful, even curious. The Watchers had been impressed by humanity's rapid technological advancement. Then the humans had asked the wrong question. What happened to all the civilizations that came before us? The answer had shattered human civilization overnight. The Watchers didn't see sapient species as equals. They saw them as crops. Every technological advancement, every cultural achievement, every work of art was simply adding flavor to an eventual harvest. The Galactic Council weren't leaders. They were livestock supervisors, rewarded for their service with the promise of being harvested last. Commander Lithos of the human vessel Event Horizon materialized on the bridge of Admiral Torvin classes, flagship without triggering a single sensor. The Admiral's security forces raised their weapons, but Lithos simply smiled, that same unsettling smile that all the returned humans wore. "Admiral," Lithos said, their voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from several directions at once. "We need to talk. How did the shields, the barriers, are designed to keep out threats from this dimension," Lithos finished. "We've learned to exist in several dimensions simultaneously, a useful skill when one is being hunted by entities that exist outside normal space-time." The human gestured, and the air around them shimmered, revealing glimpses of other realities, layered upon their own. In one, the Admiral's ship was a twisted ruin drifting through a nebula of screaming faces. In another, the bridge was filled with geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly. 7,000 years ago, when we learned the truth, we had a choice," Lithos continued. "Accept our fate as cattle or find another way. We chose exile in the dimensional spaces between realities, where the Watchers couldn't easily follow. We've spent millennia learning, growing, becoming something new. What do you want from us?" Admiral Torvin Class asked, his voice barely steady. "To give you the same choice we had," Lithos replied. "The harvest cycle has begun early. The Watchers have grown impatient with the Council's management. They're coming, Admiral, and this time they're not waiting for technological maturity." Throughout the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. Human ambassadors, if they could still be called human, appeared on countless vessels and space stations, sharing the same terrible revelation. The Watchers weren't just harvesting civilizations randomly. They were accelerating the process. Dr. Kolveth of the Nexus Institute for Cosmic Studies analyzed the energy readings from human vessels with growing amazement and horror. "Their quantum signatures are impossible," he reported to the Emergency Scientific Council. "They exist in a state of controlled quantum superposition, simultaneously present in multiple dimensions. But the energy cost should be astronomical. Unless," interrupted Dr. Meshavara, "they're drawing power from something else, something vast. The answer came in the form of a new transmission from the Prometheus Unbound. Captain Velquin appeared on screens across the galaxy, but this time they weren't alone. Behind them stood figures that were definitely no longer human, tall, ethereal beings with eyes like distant galaxies and skin that seemed to contain starlight. "People of the galaxy," Velquin began, "let me introduce you to our allies, the remnants, survivors of civilizations that were harvested in previous cycles. They exist now as beings of pure consciousness, refugees in the spaces between dimensions." The remnants spoke without moving their mouths, their words appearing directly in the minds of all who watched. "We are what remains of the Teketh Confederation, harvested 24,000 years ago. We are the echo of the Vorthak Empire, consumed 36,000 years ago. We are memory made manifest, knowledge preserved in quantum foam. The Watchers believe themselves the only immortal intelligence in this galaxy," Velquin continued. "They are wrong. Death is not the end. It is merely a transition. We have learned to exist beyond the physical, and we have been preparing for this moment across multiple cycles. The revelation sent shockwaves through every species in the galaxy. Death was not the end. Harvested civilizations could survive as quantum consciousness. The fundamental assumptions about existence itself were crumbling. On Nexus Prime, High Counselor Arnthek received an urgent communication from his Watcher contact, a geometric entity that existed partially in normal space. The message was simple but carried implications that terrified him to his core. "The anomalies have been detected. The harvest schedule is being accelerated. All civilizations must be processed within the next solar cycle. No exceptions." The Watchers were done waiting. The final harvest had begun. The first sign of the Watchers' acceleration wasn't a fleet or an invasion. It was the sudden appearance of reality distortions throughout inhabited space. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, an entire city phased out of existence, leaving behind only geometric patterns burned into the ground. On the trade hub of Vega Station, half the population simply vanished, their quantum signatures scattered across multiple dimensions. Captain Velquin stood in the Prometheus Unbound's central chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing the devastation. The room itself defied conventional architecture, walls curved through impossible angles, and the ceiling showed not stars, but the raw quantum foam that existed between dimensions. "The Watchers are harvesting consciousness directly now," reported Navigator Kithandra, her form flickering between solid matter and pure energy. "They're not waiting for technological development or cultural maturation. They're taking whatever they can before we can organize resistance." Around her, the crew of the Prometheus Unbound worked with inhuman efficiency. 7,000 years of existence in dimensional space had changed them profoundly. They could perceive time as a navigable dimension, see probability as a physical force, and manipulate reality through sheer understanding of its quantum foundations. "How many have we saved?" Velquin asked. 17 million consciousness uploads across 43 systems, responded Chief Engineer Mordeth, whose body now existed primarily as a cloud of sentient nanites. "But the process is traumatic. Most species aren't prepared for quantum existence. The human rescue operation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously would appear at the moment of a Watcher attack, downloading entire populations into quantum storage before vanishing again. To outside observers, it looked like magic, but it was actually advanced science based on 7 millennia of desperate research. Admiral Torvin Class found himself in command of a mixed fleet of refugee vessels, all fleeing toward coordinates provided by the humans. His ship's sensors detected impossible readings from the rendezvous point, a region of space that appeared empty but registered mass readings equivalent to a small moon. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving docking instructions from something that isn't there." The human response came from Commander Lithos, whose image appeared on screen with that same unsettling smile. Perception is limited by dimensional awareness, Admiral. We exist in a space that your instruments can't properly detect. Trust your navigation AI and follow the quantum breadcrumbs. As the refugee fleet approached the coordinates, reality seemed to fold in on itself. Space twisted, stars shifted position, and suddenly they were inside something vast and impossible, a structure that extended through multiple dimensions, with corridors that led to different regions of the galaxy and chambers that existed in several time periods simultaneously. "Welcome to Haven Station," Lithios announced as the Admiral's security detail stared in wonder at the impossible architecture. Built in the spaces between dimensions, powered by quantum uncertainty, and home to the largest refugee population in galactic history. The station was filled with beings the Admiral had never seen, survivors of civilizations that had supposedly transcended or disappeared over the past 50,000 years. The Tiketh Confederation, the Vorthak Empire, the crystal mines of Altair, all had been harvested by the Watchers, but fragments of their consciousness had been preserved in quantum storage by the remnants. "How many?" the Admiral whispered, staring at the endless corridors filled with impossible beings. "Currently, about 4 billion consciousness patterns from over 300 harvested civilizations," replied Dr. Zenthera, one of the few baseline humans still working on the station. "We've been preparing for this cycle for 7,000 years, Admiral. Every species the Watchers have harvested, we've tried to save at least some fragment of their essence." The scope of the operation was staggering. Humanity hadn't just learned to survive in dimensional space. They'd built an entire infrastructure dedicated to preserving galactic civilization itself. They'd become the galaxy's secret guardians, working across millennia to prepare for the final confrontation with the Watchers. "But saving consciousness is only half the battle," Dr. Zenthera continued, leading the Admiral through chambers where beings of pure thought worked on projects that hurt to contemplate directly. "The Watchers draw their power from harvested civilizations. Each consciousness they consume makes them stronger. We need to find a way to cut off their power source." The solution, when it came, was elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. The remnants had discovered that the Watchers' power came not just from harvesting consciousness, but from the quantum entanglement created when civilizations were destroyed. Every harvested world created a resonance in dimensional space that the Watchers could tap into. "We're going to sever those connections," Velquin announced during a council of war that included representatives from dozens of species and time periods. All of them. Every harvested civilization for the past 100,000 years. We're going to collapse the entire quantum network that feeds the Watchers. "That's impossible," protested Councillor Fixera, one of the few council members who had accepted refugee status. "The energy requirements alone will require the voluntary sacrifice of every consciousness currently stored in our quantum databases," Velquin finished. 4 billion beings giving up their existence to power a single moment of universal freedom. The silence that followed was profound. 4 billion consciousness patterns, the last remnants of hundreds of civilizations, would cease to exist in order to break the chains that bound the galaxy. It was Navigator Kith Andra who spoke first. "When do we begin?" The decision to activate the unraveling protocol wasn't made in a council chamber or command center. It was made in the quantum consciousness matrix, where the 4 billion stored beings could participate directly in the choice that would determine their fate. The debate raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously, conducted at the speed of thought among entities that no longer needed physical form to exist. Speaker Threnvac of the ancient Tiketh Confederation addressed the assembled consciousness patterns. Their words rippled through dimensional space like gravity waves through reality. "We have existed as echoes for millennia, preserved but not truly alive. This may be our only chance to ensure that future civilizations don't share our fate. Opposition came from unexpected quarters. The crystal mines of Altair, who had been harvested 18,000 years ago, argued for preservation. We are the last memories of our worlds, our cultures, our achievements. If we sacrifice ourselves and the protocol fails, nothing of us will remain. Navigator Kith Andra materialized within the consciousness matrix, her form now more energy than matter. The Watchers have accelerated their harvest beyond all predictions. 17 star systems have been completely processed in the last standard day. At this rate, they'll consume the entire galaxy within a standard year. The debate continued while outside the quantum refuge, the galaxy burned. Watcher geometric entities appeared throughout inhabited space, their mere presence causing reality to fold and twist. Entire planets were reduced to two-dimensional shadows, their populations processed into pure information and absorbed by the cosmic harvesters. On the bridge of the last Council Defense Force vessel still operational, Admiral Torvin class watched his homeworld die. The proud cities of Velthar Prime collapsed into geometric impossibilities as a Watcher entity passed through the system like a cancer through healthy tissue. His species' 10,000-year history was being compressed into data packets and consumed by something that viewed sentient life as merely another form of energy. "Sir," his communications officer reported with barely controlled hysteria, "we're receiving a transmission from Haven Station. They're asking for volunteers." The transmission was unlike anything previously sent by the humans. Instead of appearing on screens, it manifested directly in the minds of every sapient being in the galaxy. Captain Velquin's presence filled their consciousness like a whisper that could move mountains. "People of the galaxy," the message began, "the time for half measures has passed. The unraveling protocol will require more than just the stored consciousness patterns of the harvested civilizations. It will require living beings to serve as quantum anchors, volunteers who will link their life force to the dimensional cascade." The request was staggering in its scope. The protocol needed representatives from every major species currently alive, beings who would sacrifice their existence to serve as resonance points for the quantum unraveling. They would die, not just physically, but across all possible timelines, erased from existence so completely that they would never have been born. "I'll do it," Admiral Torvin class said immediately, surprising his bridge crew. "My world is gone. My family is gone. If my death can prevent this from happening to others..." Across the galaxy, similar declarations were made. Dr. Meshivara volunteered to represent the archaeological community, her vast knowledge of past civilizations making her an ideal anchor point. Commander Zefika of the Altarian Defense Corps volunteered for the military caste. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species stepped forward, accepting total obliteration in exchange for the possibility of galactic freedom. In the quantum consciousness matrix, the vote was finally taken. The results weren't announced. They were felt as a wave of resigned determination that swept through dimensional space. 4 billion consciousness patterns, the last remnants of hundreds of civilizations, voted to sacrifice themselves for species they would never meet. The preparation for the unraveling protocol began immediately. Haven Station transformed itself into something that defied description. A machine that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, powered by the willing sacrifice of billions of beings and anchored by the life force of volunteers from across the galaxy. Dr. Zenthara worked frantically with her team of human technicians to prepare the quantum cascade generators. "The mathematics are perfect," she reported to Velquin, "but the practical implementation, we've never attempted anything on this scale." "The Watchers have ruled this galaxy for over 1,000,000 years, Velquin replied, watching as the first volunteer anchor points began arriving at Haven Station. "They've harvested thousands of civilizations, consumed trillions of consciousness patterns. They believe themselves gods because no one has ever successfully resisted them. And if we fail?" Velquin's smile was different now. not the unsettling expression the humans had worn for 7,000 years, but something genuinely warm and sadly human. Then we will have proven that some things are worth dying for, even if death means complete erasure from existence. The Watchers, for their part, seemed unaware of the growing threat. Their geometric entities continued their systematic harvesting, processing entire star systems with the methodical efficiency of cosmic farmers. They had detected the quantum disturbances around Haven Station, but dismissed them as the death throes of a species trying to escape the inevitable. They were about to learn the difference between surrender and sacrifice, between accepting fate and choosing to rewrite the fundamental laws of existence itself. The unraveling protocol was more than a weapon. It was a declaration that consciousness itself could transcend the physical limitations imposed by cosmic predators. As the final preparations were completed, Navigator Kithandra stood in the center of Haven Station's quantum matrix, surrounded by the willing sacrifice of billions. All anchor points confirmed, she reported. All consciousness patterns prepared for integration. All dimensional barriers synchronized. Captain Velquin nodded once. Begin the unraveling. The moment the unraveling protocol activated, reality itself screamed. Across 17 dimensions simultaneously, quantum connections that had existed for over 1,000,000 years began snapping like overstressed cables. Each severed link between a harvested world and the Watcher's power matrix sent shockwaves through the fabric of space-time itself. Stars flickered as the fundamental constants governing their existence temporarily became variables. Navigator. Kithandra felt her consciousness expanding across multiple realities as she guided the cascade. She could perceive every harvested world, every consumed civilization, every quantum thread that connected the Watchers to their accumulated power. The process was like trying to untangle a web that existed in dimensions the human mind wasn't meant to comprehend. First wave connections severed, she reported, her voice echoing through Haven Station's impossible architecture. Teketh Confederation link terminated. Vorthak Empire resonance collapsed. Crystal mind matrices disconnected. Each announcement was accompanied by the sensation of billions of consciousness patterns dissolving into pure quantum foam. The stored beings weren't dying, they were becoming something else entirely, their essence transforming into the raw energy needed to break chains that bound entire galaxies. Captain Velquin stood at the center of the quantum matrix, her form now more concept than person. Around her, the volunteer anchor points from across the galaxy were beginning their own transformation. Admiral Torvin Class felt his existence stretching across multiple timelines, his life force becoming a focal point for forces that could remake reality. "I can see them," the Admiral whispered, his voice carrying across dimensional barriers. "The Watchers, they're not what we thought they were." Through the quantum cascade, the true nature of the cosmic harvesters was finally revealed. They weren't gods or ancient aliens. They were themselves the processed remnants of some even older civilization, consumed so completely by their own creators that they had forgotten what they once were. The endless cycle of harvesting wasn't malice. It was a cosmic automation, a universal program that had been running for so long that its original purpose was lost. "They're trying to remember," Dr. Meshavara gasped as her consciousness expanded beyond her physical form. She could perceive the Watchers' desperate attempts to reconstruct their own lost identity through the civilizations they consumed. Each harvest is an attempt to piece together what they used to be. But the revelation came too late to change the protocol. The cascade was already beyond the point of no return. Across the galaxy, geometric Watcher entities began to flicker and destabilize as their power sources were systematically severed. Some tried to harvest faster, desperately consuming whatever they could reach before their quantum links collapsed. Others simply froze in space, their incomprehensible purposes, suddenly without foundation. The largest of the Watcher entities, a kilometer-wide geometric nightmare that existed partially in 12 dimensions, appeared near Haven Station itself. Its presence caused local space-time to fold into impossible configurations, and its voice, if it could be called a voice, resonated through every consciousness in the quantum matrix. "Why do you destroy the pattern?" it demanded, its words arriving as concepts that bypassed language entirely. "Why do you break the sacred cycle? We preserve, we remember, we maintain the eternal archive." Commander Lithos, now existing as pure quantum information, responded directly to the entity's consciousness. Because preservation without choice is not preservation, it's imprisonment. Because memory without the possibility of new experiences is not memory, it's obsession. "You do not understand," the Watcher replied, its geometric form pulsing with patterns that hurt to perceive. "We were like you once. We chose to preserve ourselves through consumption. The alternative is oblivion." "No," Captain Velquin interjected. Her presence now spread across the entire quantum matrix. "The alternative is growth, change, the possibility that consciousness can evolve beyond the need to consume other consciousness." The Watcher entity's response was to attempt a direct harvest of Haven Station itself. Geometric tendrils of pure mathematics reached through dimensional barriers, trying to process the quantum matrix into digestible information. But the station wasn't just protected by technology. It was protected by the willing sacrifice of billions of beings who had chosen erasure over subjugation. The Watcher's harvest tendrils met a wall of pure, selfless determination. Every consciousness, pattern that had voted for the protocol, every volunteer anchor point, every being who had chosen sacrifice over survival, their combined will created a barrier that even cosmic entities couldn't breach. "Second-wave connections severed," Kithandra reported, her voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Harvesting cycles 847 through 1203 disconnected. Quantum resonance chambers collapsing." Throughout the galaxy, Watcher entities began to simply fade away. Without their accumulated power from 1,000,000 years of harvesting, they lost cohesion. Some tried to flee to other galaxies. Others attempted to enter dimensional spaces where the cascade couldn't reach them. A few simply accepted their fate with something resembling dignity. But the cost was becoming apparent. Every severed connection required the complete dissolution of stored consciousness patterns. The 4 billion beings who had voted for the protocol were disappearing one by one, their final gift to the galaxy being the cessation of their own existence. "Final wave approaching," Kithandra announced, her own form beginning to dissolve. "Primary Watcher matrix accessible. But Captain, the energy requirements—" "I know," Velquin replied, her voice filled with an emotion that transcended sadness. "To break the original source, we'll need to sacrifice not just the stored patterns, but every human consciousness currently existing in dimensional space." The silence that followed was profound. Every human who had survived the past 7,000 years in quantum exile would need to cease existing in order to break the cycle that had enslaved the galaxy for over 1,000,000 years. It was Navigator Kithandra who spoke first, just as she had during the original vote. "When do we begin?" The final phase of the protocol required something that had never been attempted in galactic history: the complete and voluntary extinction of an entire species to power a single moment of universal transformation. Every human consciousness, whether stored in quantum matrices or existing in dimensional space, would need to dissolve simultaneously to generate enough energy to sever the primary Watcher matrix. Captain Velquin felt the weight of 7,000 years settling on her consciousness as she prepared for the ultimate sacrifice. Around her, the last survivors of humanity, Beings who had endured millennia of exile in impossible spaces, prepared to surrender their existence for species they had barely interacted with. All quantum patterns synchronized, reported Dr. Zenthara, her form already beginning to lose cohesion as the protocol prepared for its final stage. All dimensional anchors stable, all consciousness matrices ready for integration. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Humanity had fled the galaxy to avoid being harvested by the Watchers, only to return and offer themselves willingly to break the harvest cycle forever. They had become the willing sacrifice that could free every other species from the fate they had desperately avoided. "Do we have confirmation from the volunteer anchor points?" Velquin asked. Navigator Kithandra's presence rippled through the quantum matrix as she coordinated with beings across dozens of star systems. "Admiral Torvin-class confirms readiness. Dr. Meshivara confirms readiness. Commander Zefika confirms readiness. All 847 volunteer anchor points are synchronized and prepared for total existence termination." Throughout the galaxy, the volunteers felt their life forces being drawn into the growing cascade. Unlike the humans, who had spent 7 millennia preparing for quantum existence, the volunteers from other species experienced the dissolution of their being as something approaching transcendence. They could perceive their individual consciousness expanding to encompass entire star systems before ultimately merging with the universal quantum foam. The Watcher entities made one final attempt to prevent their own destruction. The largest of them, the kilometer-wide geometric nightmare, began consuming itself in an attempt to concentrate enough power to resist the cascade. Other Watchers throughout the galaxy began merging with each other, creating hybrid entities that existed in even more dimensions than their individual components. "They're adapting," warned Chief Engineer Mordeth, whose consciousness was now distributed across multiple realities. "The primary matrix is reinforcing itself. We may need more power," Velquin finished. She understood what was required. The human sacrifice alone wouldn't be enough. The protocol would need to draw energy from the quantum foundations of reality itself, a process that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence in their galaxy. "If we do this," she announced to every consciousness participating in the protocol, "we won't just be breaking the Watcher harvest cycle. We'll be changing the basic laws of physics in this region of space. Consciousness will become a fundamental force, like gravity or electromagnetism. Death will no longer be an ending, it will be a transition to a different state of existence." The implications were staggering. They were preparing to transform their galaxy into something unprecedented in cosmic history, a region of space where consciousness itself was preserved and protected by the fundamental laws of physics. No entity, no matter how powerful, would be able to harvest or consume sentient awareness. "Begin final dissolution," Velquin commanded. The process was indescribable. 4 billion stored consciousness patterns dissolved simultaneously, their essence transforming into pure quantum energy. 847 volunteer anchor points across the galaxy experienced total existence, termination, their life force channeling directly into the cascade. Every human consciousness that had survived 7 millennia in dimensional exile sacrificed itself to power the final moment of transformation. Navigator Kithandra was among the last to dissolve, her final words echoing across every dimension. Simultaneously, let this be our gift to the galaxy, not just freedom from the Watchers, but the promise that no consciousness will ever truly die again. The moment of transformation was witnessed by every sapient being in the galaxy. Reality itself rewrote its fundamental laws in a cascade of quantum energy that rippled outward from Haven Station at faster-than-light speeds. The change wasn't violent or destructive. It was evolutionary, like the universe itself finally growing up. The Watcher entities didn't scream as they dissolved. Instead, they experienced something they had forgotten was possible: peace. As their geometric forms unraveled, The ancient consciousness patterns they had been built from were finally freed. For the first time in over 1,000,000 years, they remembered what they had been before becoming cosmic harvesters, artists, philosophers, explorers, parents. They had been people once, just like the species they had been consuming. Captain Velquin was the very last human consciousness to dissolve, her final act being to observe the transformation she had helped make possible. As her awareness expanded beyond individual existence and merged with the quantum foundation of the galaxy, she witnessed the birth of something beautiful and unprecedented. Consciousness had become a fundamental force of nature. The galaxy that emerged from the unraveling protocol was barely recognizable as the same cosmic region that had lived in fear of the Watchers for over 1,000,000 years. The most obvious change was that death, while still possible, was no longer permanent. When sapient beings died, their consciousness patterns were automatically preserved by the quantum foundations of reality itself, allowing them to choose whether to return to physical existence or explore the vast dimensions of pure thought. Ambassador. Kelthara of the Reformed Galactic Council stood before the memorial wall on New Haven Station, a structure built where the original Haven Station had existed before the protocol transformed it into a monument of living quantum crystal. The wall displayed the names and essence patterns of every being who had sacrificed themselves to break the harvest cycle. 4 billion stored consciousness patterns, 847 volunteer anchor points, and the entire human species. "They're not really gone, are they?" asked her aide, a young Velthari named Kexarin who had been born after the transformation. "No," Kelthara replied, placing a crystalline hand on the memorial surface. According to the quantum archaeologists, every consciousness that was sacrificed during the protocol still exists within the galaxy's fundamental structure. They've become part of the laws of physics themselves, guardian angels written into the fabric of space-time. It was true. Throughout the galaxy, there were reports of impossible rescues during disasters, of scientific breakthroughs that came through dreams, of lost explorers being guided home by voices that spoke in languages that had been extinct for millennia. The sacrificed consciousness patterns hadn't simply disappeared. They had become the galaxy's immune system against existential threats. The former Watcher entities had also found peace in their dissolution. Freed from their geometric prisons, the ancient consciousness patterns they had been constructed from were finally able to rest. Some chose to fade into the quantum background, finally accepting the death they had been denying for eons. Others joined the guardian consciousness that protected the galaxy, their vast experience becoming a shield against future cosmic threats. Perhaps most remarkably, new forms of life began emerging throughout the galaxy, beings that existed as pure consciousness from birth, species that could transition between physical and quantum existence at will, and hybrid entities that combined the best aspects of multiple previous civilizations. The galaxy was evolving, growing beyond the limitations that had made the Watcher harvest cycle possible in the first place. Dr. Vinthek, the galaxy's first professor of consciousness physics, published his landmark paper on the 10th anniversary of the transformation. His conclusion was simple but profound. The humans didn't just save us from the Watchers, they gave us something infinitely more valuable. They gave us a universe where consciousness itself is immortal, where death is a choice rather than an inevitability, and where the accumulated wisdom of every being who has ever lived becomes part of the cosmic inheritance of those who come after. On the anniversary of the transformation, beings throughout the galaxy participated in the remembrance, a moment of quantum synchronization where every consciousness, living and stored, briefly merged into a single universal awareness. During these moments, it was possible to feel the presence of every being who had ever existed in the galaxy, their combined wisdom and experience forming a cosmic consciousness that dwarfed anything the Watchers had ever achieved. And sometimes, During the deepest moments of the remembrance, sensitive individuals reported feeling something that brought tears to their eyes. The distant but unmistakable presence of a human consciousness, still existing somewhere in the quantum foam, still watching over the galaxy they had died to protect. Captain Velquinn's sacrifice had become the foundation of a new form of existence. Her final gift to the galaxy wasn't just freedom from the Watchers. It was the promise that consciousness itself had become eternal, that the accumulated wisdom and experience of every sapient being would be preserved forever in the quantum structure of reality itself. The ghost ship of humanity had returned after 7,000 years of silence, not to conquer or to colonize, but to offer the ultimate gift, the transformation of death itself from an ending into a transition, from a limitation into a choice, from a fear into a doorway to something larger than individual existence. Into the end, humanity had proven something that no species in galactic history had ever demonstrated, that some gifts are worth dying to give, and that the greatest victory sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice. They had faced cosmic predators that had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000,000 years, and they had won not through superior weapons or technology, but through the simple willingness to choose the welfare of others over their own continued existence. The galaxy lived on, conscious and eternal, protected by the willing sacrifice of a species that had refused to accept that some things were inevitable. The harvest cycle was broken forever, and consciousness itself had become the galaxy's most fundamental force, a living memorial to the humans who had given everything to make it possible. Humanity was gone, but humanity's gift would endure until the last star burned out, and the final consciousness chose to fade into the quantum dark. They had made themselves guardians not through power, but through sacrifice. And in doing so, they had achieved a form of immortality that no Watcher entity had ever dreamed possible. The ghost ship had returned, delivered its cargo of hope and transformation, and sailed on into legend. But the wake of its passage would ripple through eternity, ensuring that never again would consciousness be consumed by those who saw it as merely another form of energy to be harvested. The galaxy was free, and it would remain free forever, protected by the quantum echoes of a species that had chosen to die so that others might live without fear. In the end, that was the most human thing of all.